Hello everyone. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you looked at your partner not as your spouse, but as the mysterious, fascinating human being you once couldn't wait to discover? When was the last time you touched, not because routine told you to, but because desire moved you? For so many couples, intimacy begins as a fire, wild and untamed. But over time, it quietly reshapes itself into habit, into duty, into the comfort of knowing. And yet, within that comfort, something essential often gets lost. Men husbands rarely say it out loud, but there are things they silently wish their wives understood about intimacy. Not just about sex, but about touch, attention, presence, admiration, the small details that make them feel wanted, desired, alive. Because for a man, intimacy is not only physical release, it is identity, it is affirmation, it is the sense of being chosen again and again by the woman he loves. Too often, when this need goes unheard, it turns into distance, quiet resentment, or an aching loneliness right inside the marriage bed. And today I want us to explore this space together, not with judgment, but with curiosity. What do husbands wish their wives knew? And what could change if we truly listened? You know, intimacy is one of those words we often reduce to the narrowest of meanings. For many, it instantly translates to sex, to the physical. But the truth is far more nuanced. Intimacy is the invisible thread that binds two people not only in the bedroom, but in the spaces between, in the way you look at each other across the table, in the way your hands find each other in a crowded room, in the way silence between you feels like comfort instead of distance. And yet, here is where so many marriages find themselves in trouble. Because while men and women both crave intimacy, they experience it differently. For many women, intimacy is an unfolding that starts with emotional closeness, words, affection, tenderness that open the door to physical connection. For men, intimacy often begins the other way around. The physical is the language through which they feel love, the bridge that gives them access to tenderness, to vulnerability, to safety. But here is the quiet tragedy: men rarely voice this. They carry it inside, sometimes as a longing, sometimes as frustration, often as silence. And I think if we could open this door, if we could listen without defensiveness, we might hear something important. We might hear that what every husband wishes his wife knew about intimacy is not about performance, not about frequency, not about obligation, it's about meaning. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a man who works long hours, who shoulders responsibility for his family, who faces the world with its demands and pressures. He comes home to his wife, the person he loves most, and somewhere deep down, he longs for her touch, not only because it excites him, but because it affirms him. It tells him, you matter. You are not invisible. You are not just a provider or a father or a partner in logistics. You are a man I still desire, a man I still choose. That simple affirmation received in the language of intimacy can be the difference between a marriage that feels alive and one that feels like two roommates sharing a house. This is why I often say for men, sex is not just about pleasure. It is about identity. It is the place where they feel recognized. When a wife turns toward her husband with desire, she tells him without words, I see you, I want you, you are still the one. And when she turns away too often, or when intimacy becomes mechanical, he doesn't only feel rejected sexually, he feels rejected as a person. Now, of course, this is not to say that women don't feel the same sting of rejection. They do deeply. But the difference lies in how each gender tends to process it. Many women can compartmentalize intimacy. If the emotional bond is strained, they may step back from physical closeness. Men, however, often seek physical closeness to repair the emotional bond. So when intimacy fades, a man may not have another language to reconnect. He is left stranded. And here lies the first truth every husband wishes his wife knew. When he reaches for you, he is not always asking for sex. He is asking to be let in. He is asking to feel your warmth, your openness, your willingness to bridge the distance. He is asking to be reminded that in your world, he is still wanted. But there's more. Intimacy for men is also fragile. It is bound to confidence, to ego, to vulnerability they don't often show elsewhere. A man may never tell his boss he feels insecure. He may never admit to his friends that he feels unseen. But in the bed he shares with his wife, in those moments of closeness, he is exposed. And when that exposure is met with dismissal, when she rolls her eyes or says, not tonight, without tenderness, or engages without presence, it cuts deeper than most women realize. Because rejection in intimacy is not only rejection of the act but of him. I have sat with countless couples who tell me a similar story. The wife says, he only wants me for sex. The husband says, she never wants me at all. And beneath those words is a profound misunderstanding. Because what he wants is not only sex. What he wants is connection, validation, recognition. What she wants is often tenderness, conversation, emotional safety. And the irony is that both are asking for the same thing, love expressed in the language that speaks loudest to them. So what happens? The cycle begins. He feels rejected, so he withdraws. She feels pressured, so she retreats. The distance grows. And soon enough, both are lying in the same bed, separated not by space, but by silence. This is why it is so important to reframe intimacy not as a negotiation of duty, but as a shared dance. Every husband wishes his wife knew that when she leans into this dance, when she offers affection without being asked, when she allows herself to be playful, when she gives him the gift of her desire, it nourishes him in ways that ripple through every part of the marriage. He becomes softer, more open, more communicative. He feels secure enough to meet her emotional needs because his own are not starving. Think of it like water flowing between two banks. When one side gives, the other flourishes, and the river keeps moving. But when both sides hold back, when intimacy becomes transactional or absent, the river dries up, and what is left is a desert of routine, responsibility, and quiet resentment. So perhaps the first invitation is this: to see intimacy not as another task on the endless to-do list, but as a space of nourishment. Husbands are not asking their wives to perform, to meet quotas, to turn their marriage into a checklist of encounters. They are asking for genuine connection, expressed in a way that feels affirming to them. And the truth is, when a wife leans into that space, she often discovers that her own needs, emotional, relational, physical, are met in return, because intimacy at its best is reciprocal. It is not about who initiates more, who withholds more, who owes more. It is about generosity, and generosity in intimacy is never wasted. It always comes back, sometimes in unexpected forms, in tenderness, in patience, in kindness, in the small daily gestures that make a marriage feel like home. Now let me bring this closer to you. If you are listening and you are a wife, ask yourself, when was the last time you surprised your husband with desire? Not because it was scheduled, not because it was expected, but because you wanted to remind him that he is still the man you choose. When was the last time you reached out first, without waiting for him to close the gap? These are small acts, but their impact is enormous. And if you are a husband listening, I know what you are thinking. You may be nodding, saying, yes, this is exactly what I've been trying to say. But remember too, intimacy is a two-way street. As much as you long to be seen, so does she. As much as you want to be desired, so does she. The challenge is not in proving whose needs matter more, but in learning to translate. To say, here is my language of love, let me also learn yours. That translation between physical intimacy and emotional intimacy, between his longing and her longing, is the real secret. And when couples learn to translate, the marriage begins to breathe again. So let's move a little deeper. Because if intimacy for men is not only about the act of sex but about recognition, then the next question becomes, what do husbands wish their wives understood about the way desire actually works for them? For many women, desire is responsive. It grows out of connection, a meaningful conversation, a tender gesture, a sense of being understood. These are the sparks that can lead to physical closeness. For many men, however, desire is more spontaneous. It does not require the same build-up. It can arrive in the middle of the day unprovoked. And what matters is not the context but the openness of the partner. When his wife meets that spontaneity with receptiveness, he feels alive, validated, attractive. When she consistently meets it with rejection, he begins to internalize a message: I am undesirable. I am no longer seen as a man, only as a partner in chores or co-parenting. This misunderstanding creates so much unnecessary pain. A wife thinks he just wants sex. He doesn't care about me as a person. A husband thinks she doesn't want me. I must not be enough anymore. Both miss the point that for him, the desire is the doorway to deeper connection, not the end goal. And for her, the connection is the doorway to desire, not a denial of it. I often say that couples need to stop arguing about who is right and instead get curious about why their experiences are different. Because when you shift from blame to curiosity, something changes. Instead of saying, you never want me, a husband might say, I feel rejected when you turn me away, because for me intimacy is how I feel loved. Instead of saying, all you think about is sex, a wife might say, I need to feel close emotionally before I can open up physically. Do you hear the difference? One is accusation, the other is vulnerability. And intimacy only grows in the soil of vulnerability. But here is what men wish their wives could truly see: intimacy is one of the few spaces where they feel free to be vulnerable. Think about it. In so many areas of life, men are taught to be strong, to carry weight, to suppress fear, to not show need. At work, they compete. Among friends, they joke. In society, they project confidence. But in the arms of their wife, they allow themselves to let go. They show softness. They reveal longing. They ask to be held, even if the asking is disguised as initiation of sex. If a wife could look at her husband and think, this is not just about his body, this is about his heart, the whole picture would change. Because when a man reaches for intimacy, what he is really reaching for is reassurance that he is enough, that his wife still delights in him, that he is not forgotten in the daily grind of life. And yet here is the paradox. Many wives hold back from intimacy because they feel unappreciated in other areas of life. They say, he wants my body, but he doesn't see my exhaustion, my needs, my stress. So they retreat, they close the door. And what does the husband experience? He feels rejected not only as a lover, but as a man. And this rejection can quietly erode his confidence, his patience, his willingness to engage emotionally. It becomes a cycle. She withholds physical intimacy because she feels unseen emotionally. He withholds emotional intimacy because he feels unwanted physically. And both wait for the other to make the first move. Both feel justified. Both feel lonely. And the marriage suffers in silence. This is why the second truth every husband wishes wishes his wife knew is this: when you initiate intimacy, even occasionally, you send a message that is far louder than the act itself. You say, I choose you, I desire you, I still see you as my man. And for him, this message is transformative. It breaks the cycle. It softens his defenses. It makes him more likely to give her the emotional closeness she longs for, because now he no longer feels starved. I want you to imagine something. Picture a man who, after months of always being the one to initiate, suddenly finds his wife reaching for him. She kisses him first, or touches his shoulder in that way that says more than words. What do you think he feels in that moment? Relief, joy, confidence, a sense of being chosen, not tolerated. And when he feels that, he becomes a different kind of partner. He becomes more attentive, more generous, more present. Because intimacy has nourished him, and nourished people give more freely. Now, let me pause and ask you, why does this matter so much? Because marriage is not only about roles and responsibilities. It is about the invisible bond that keeps two people coming back to each other, despite everything else life throws at them. And when intimacy dries up, that bond begins to weaken. Couples still function. They still raise children, pay bills, attend events. But inside, they are disconnected. They are lonely together. And that is one of the most painful places to be. But it doesn't have to stay that way. The bridge back to connection is often smaller than we think. A kind word, a moment of playfulness, a willingness to lean in when the other reaches out. Husbands don't wish for perfection. They don't expect their wives to be endlessly available or performative. What they wish for is acknowledgement, that when they extend themselves, they are not always met with a wall, that their wives remember desire is not only theirs to receive but theirs to give. And here's something important. Intimacy does not always mean sex. Husbands also crave touch without agenda. They want to feel their wife's hand on their chest as they fall asleep. They want the brush of her lips as she passes in the kitchen. They want laughter, play, a sense of fun. When intimacy is woven through daily life in these small ways, the pressure around sex softens. It no longer feels like a demand, but a natural extension of closeness. Many women tell me, but if I give him a little, he'll always want more. And I say that's not always true. Sometimes, when you give freely without fearing obligation, his hunger quiets because he no longer feels deprived. Intimacy offered willingly is nourishment. Intimacy withheld out of fear becomes poison. So let us shift the lens. Instead of asking how much sex is enough, let's ask, how much connection do we create in our daily lives? Instead of asking, why does he always want me? Let's ask, why does he feel he cannot live without this closeness? The answers will not only change the way wives see their husbands, but the way husbands see themselves. Because ultimately, intimacy is not a duty. It is a gift that affirms, heals, connects. A gift that every husband longs for, but too few know how to ask for. And maybe that is the third truth husbands wish their wives knew, that behind every request for intimacy, behind every touch, behind every initiation is a question unspoken. Do you still want me? Do you still see me? Am I still enough for you? And when the answer comes in the form of a smile, a touch, a moment of presence, the marriage breathes again. What strikes me most when I sit with couples is how little we speak about longing. We speak about conflict, about disappointment, about unmet needs. But longing, that quiet ache for closeness, is often buried beneath frustration. And yet, when you strip away the arguments, the accusations, the silence, what remains is usually very simple. A husband longing to be wanted and a wife longing to be cherished. And here is where so many men feel unseen. Because for them, intimacy is not only about being desired physically. It is also about being admired. Husbands may not always say it out loud, but they want to know that their wives still find them attractive, not only as partners in life, but as men. They want to feel that spark in her eyes, that warmth in her voice, that moment when she looks at him and communicates, you are still the one who makes my heart beat faster. Think about it. In the early stages of love, admiration flows easily. She smiles at his confidence, at his jokes, at the way he moves through the world. He feels like her hero, her chosen one. And that sense of being admired becomes fuel. It makes him want to give more, do more, be more. But over time, familiarity dulls admiration. Life replaces mystery with predictability. She begins to notice his flaws more than his strengths, his absences more than his presence. And without realizing it, she stops offering those small affirmations that once came so naturally. What happens then? The husband begins to question his worth, not at work, not among friends, but in the most intimate space of all, his marriage. He might still act strong, still carry responsibility, still provide, but inside he feels unseen. And so when he reaches for intimacy, it is not just about physical closeness. It is about regaining that lost admiration, about hearing in her body and in her touch the words she no longer says out loud, I desire you. I am proud of you. You are my man. This is why admiration matters so deeply to men, because for many husbands, intimacy is the place where admiration is most vividly expressed. When his wife responds to him with desire, when she initiates, when she lingers in her gaze, he feels validated in ways that ripple into his entire sense of self. He walks taller. He shows up differently in the world. He becomes more generous at home, more patient with children, more willing to listen, because admiration has given him oxygen, and with oxygen he can give back. And yet here lies the challenge. Many wives hesitate to express admiration because they themselves feel unappreciated. They think, why should I admire him when he doesn't notice all I do? But admiration is not about reward. It is about generosity. It is about creating a cycle where both partners nourish each other with what they most crave. So the question becomes, how do you rekindle admiration in a long marriage? How do you move beyond routine and find again the spark of desire? Sometimes it is as simple as paying attention, watching the way he fixes something around the house and saying, I love how capable you are, seeing the way he plays with the children and whispering, you're such a good father, catching his eye across a crowded room and holding it just a moment longer, letting him feel that silent electricity. These are not grand gestures, they are small moments of recognition. And for husbands, these moments matter more than they dare to admit, because men too live with insecurity. They may not always show it, but it is there. The pressure to provide, to perform, to stay attractive, to be enough, it weighs heavily. And when their wives offer admiration, it lifts that weight. It tells them, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be mine. That reassurance is intimacy of the highest kind. But intimacy is not only about admiration. It is also about play. This is another truth men often wish their wives knew, that intimacy thrives on playfulness, not seriousness. Too often, sex in marriage becomes a negotiation, a chore, a duty. But in the beginning, it was playful. It was about curiosity, laughter, adventure. And husbands long for that spirit to return. They wish their wives would laugh with them in bed, tease them, explore, experiment, not because they need variety, but because play keeps intimacy alive. Play is where pressure dissolves. When a couple can laugh together in their most vulnerable moments, intimacy becomes safe again. It becomes less about performance and more about connection. Husbands wish their wives knew that they don't always need the perfect setting, the perfect mood, or the perfect timing. Sometimes, what they long for most is spontaneity, the lightheartedness of being desired without condition. And here is something else. Men often equate intimacy with acceptance of their flaws. When a wife accepts his body, his imperfections, his vulnerabilities, he feels free. When she criticizes, compares, or withholds, he feels diminished. And this is not because men are fragile. It is because intimacy is the one place where they allow themselves to be fragile. And when fragility is met with kindness, it deepens love. So let me invite you into a thought. What if intimacy was not about obligation, but about generosity? What if it was not about keeping score, but about creating moments of delight for each other? Husbands wish their wives knew that their longing is not selfish. It is an invitation to connection, to play, to recognition. And when that invitation is accepted, the marriage begins to glow again. Because here is the truth. Intimacy is not about quantity. It is about quality. A single encounter filled with admiration, play, presence, and tenderness can nourish a marriage more than weeks of perfunctory contact. Husbands long for intimacy that feels alive, not mechanical. They wish their wives knew that what they want most is not frequency, but depth. The depth that comes when she is fully there. When her body and heart say the same thing, I am with you, I want you. And so the third layer of intimacy is about admiration and play. Husbands want to be admired, not only for what they do, but for who they are. They want their wives to see them with eyes of desire, not only of duty. And they want intimacy to be fun, light, alive, not weighed down by the heaviness of obligation. When wives can step into this space, offering admiration, laughter, spontaneity, they give their husbands the greatest gift, a reminder that intimacy is not lost. It is simply waiting to be rediscovered. There is another layer we must touch, one that is often hidden behind silence. It is the vulnerability men rarely speak about, but it pulses beneath every longing for intimacy. Husbands wish their wives understood that when they are met with rejection, not only of their advances, but of their deeper needs, the wind goes far beyond the bedroom. Rejection intimacy for a man is rarely just about sex. It is about belonging. It is about the question that quietly follows him. Am I still enough for her? Am I still her choice? And when this question remains unanswered, when rejection becomes routine, it begins to echo into other parts of life. He becomes less patient, more withdrawn, more prone to anger or silence. Not because he is only thinking about sex, but because he feels that the one place he hoped to find comfort has become a place of loneliness. I have sat with men who describe this feeling as standing at the edge of their own marriage, looking in but not being invited. They love their wives, they care for their families, but they feel exiled from the very intimacy that once made them feel whole. And this exile breeds quiet despair. Some retreat into themselves, some bury it in work, some seek affirmation elsewhere. Not always through betrayal, but through distractions that temporarily soothe the ache of not being wanted. Husbands wish their wives knew that this is not about entitlement. It is not about demanding intimacy on command. It is about the human need to feel chosen. And in marriage, that choice is expressed again and again, not just at the altar years ago, but in every touch, every glance, every moment of closeness. But here's the paradox. Wives often withdraw not because they don't love their husbands, but because they themselves feel overwhelmed, unseen, unappreciated. They may carry the invisible weight of household tasks, of emotional labor, of exhaustion. And when he reaches for intimacy, she interprets it as another demand, another item on her already endless list. What she doesn't realize is that for him, this moment is not another task, it is his lifeline. This is where empathy becomes the bridge. Husbands wish their wives knew that when they respond to intimacy, not with duty but with willingness, they are not only giving him pleasure, they are giving him grounding. They are restoring his sense of worth. They are telling him, you are not just my partner in logistics, you are my lover, my man, the one I still choose above all others. And what happens when this understanding is missing? Miscommunication. He feels rejected, she feels pressured, both grow resentful, and resentment is the slow poison of marriage. It kills not suddenly but quietly, drip by drip, until the bond that once felt unbreakable becomes fragile. But it doesn't have to be this way. Intimacy can be reclaimed, and often it begins with something small. Husbands don't wish for grand gestures or constant availability. What they wish for is presence. A wife's hand resting on his arm with tenderness, a kiss offered without reason, a moment of undistracted attention when he speaks. These gestures may seem minor, but to him, they speak louder than words. I still want you. I still see you. There is another truth here. Men long for intimacy not only with their bodies, but with their emotions. Many wives underestimate how deeply their husbands yearn to be emotionally close, even if they don't always know how to express it. A man may not have the language for his feelings. He may not sit down and say, I feel lonely in this marriage. But he will reach for her physically because that is the language he knows. Behind that touch is often a plea, hold me, reassure me, remind me that I matter. When wives can translate this gesture not as pressure but as vulnerability, everything changes. Suddenly, his advances are no longer seen as selfish but as a form of communication. Suddenly, she sees the boy inside the man, the boy who longs to be accepted, to be wanted, to be loved. And when she meets that longing with tenderness, the man blossoms. Let me ask you, how often do we forget that beneath every adult exterior is still a child longing for affirmation? Husbands are no different. Beneath their strength, their competence, their responsibilities, is the quiet boy who once dreamed of being a hero in the eyes of someone he loved. And marriage at its best is where that dream finds a home, but only if both partners are willing to see it. Only if both are willing to meet vulnerability with care, rather than with dismissal. So perhaps the next invitation is this: to see intimacy as less about duty and more about dialogue. Every touch, every embrace, every glance is a conversation. A husband says, I want to feel close to you. A wife says, I want to feel cherished by you. When both listen, when both respond, the conversation flows. When both stop listening, the silence becomes unbearable. Husbands wish their wives knew that intimacy is not a demand. It is a dialogue. It is not something he wants to take, but something he longs to share. And when she shares it with him, not out of obligation, but out of generosity, she awakens a side of him that is more tender, more attentive, more emotionally present. Because intimacy is not only what he receives, it is also what it unlocks in him to give. And here lies a beautiful paradox. The more a man feels desire, the more he desires to give, the more he feels wanted, the more he wants to provide. But emotionally, spiritually, relationally, intimacy is the soil where generosity grows. And when a wife leans into it, she often discovers that what comes back to her is more than she imagined. So let me leave you with this thought. Every husband carries within him a silent wish. A wish that his wife would see his advances not as pressure but as vulnerability, that she would understand his longing not as selfishness but as a plea for connection, that she would respond not always with yes, but with tenderness, with presence, with the reassurance that he is still the one she chooses. When that wish is met, a man's heart softens, his defenses fall, and the marriage becomes not just a partnership, but a sanctuary. When we strip everything down to its essence, intimacy in marriage is not about technique, nor frequency, nor performance. It is about presence. It is about the courage to see and be seen, to reach and to be reached for, to keep choosing each other every single day, even when life gets messy, even when exhaustion sets in, even when routine tempts us to forget the mystery that first drew us together. Husbands wish their wives knew this. Intimacy is their way of saying, I am still here. I still want you, I still need us. Behind every touch is not only desire but devotion. Behind every initiation is not only lust but longing. Longing not just for her body but for her closeness, her tenderness, her admiration, her playfulness, her acceptance. Longing to be reminded that the marriage is not just about tasks and obligations, but about love that is alive and breathing. And here is the truth that so many men carry silently. They are not always as strong as they seem. They may hold the world on their shoulders, but in the quiet of their marriage, they long for softness. They long to collapse into the arms of the woman they love and feel safe enough to be vulnerable. They may not say this out loud because vulnerability does not come easily, but their advances, their touches, their longing, it all speaks this unspoken truth. And wives, when you respond to this truth with openness, you do more than meet a physical need. You offer him sanctuary. You give him the rare gift of being fully himself, without armor, without performance. And in return, you awaken in him the desire to give, to cherish, to protect, to provide, not because he has to, but because he wants to sue, because intimacy, when it is mutual, fuels generosity in both directions. So perhaps the question is not what do men want from intimacy? Perhaps the real question is what happens when we meet each other there? Because when intimacy is alive, everything else in the marriage begins to breathe more easily. Conflicts soften, communication deepens, daily life feels lighter, because beneath it all there is connection. Think of intimacy like the roots of a tree. You don't always see them, but they are what nourish the trunk, the branches, the leaves. When the roots are strong, the tree thrives. When the roots dry up, the tree weakens no matter how tall it once stood. Intimacy is the unseen root system of marriage. It sustains everything else. And this is why husbands wish their wives knew that intimacy is not a frivolous want. It is not an optional extra. It is central to their sense of self, their confidence, their ability to show up in the relationship with love and generosity. When intimacy fades, it is not only the bedroom that suffers, it is the whole marriage. And when intimacy flourishes, the marriage flourishes with it. But here's the beautiful part, it is never too late to restore it. I have seen couples rediscover each other after decades of distance. I have seen husbands and wives look at each other with fresh eyes after years of routine. And often, it begins with the smallest of gestures. A lingering touch, a whispered compliment, a willingness to initiate, to surprise, to laugh again together. Intimacy is not built in grand gestures. It is built in the quiet accumulation of small, intentional acts of closeness. So if you are listening now, perhaps ask yourself, what is one thing I could do tonight to remind my partner that they are still my choice? What is one way I could step into generosity rather than waiting for them to go first? Intimacy does not grow when we wait for the other to move. It grows when we both decide to lean in. And let us not forget, this is not only about husbands. Wives too carry longings that go unspoken. They wish to be cherished, to be emotionally seen, to be cared for beyond the physical. And so the real work of intimacy is learning to translate, to say this is what I long for, and to also ask, what do you long for? To meet not in duty but in delight, not in resentment but in generosity. If husbands wish their wives knew one thing, it would be this: their advances, their desire, their need for intimacy is not about selfishness. It is about connection. It is about being chosen, being admired, being loved not only as a partner in life but as a lover in heart and body. And when wives understand this, when they respond with tenderness rather than suspicion, the marriage transforms. Intimacy becomes not a battlefield, but a sanctuary. Not a negotiation, but a dance. Not a duty, but a gift. So as we close, I want to leave you with this reminder: love is not sustained by obligation, but by choice. Intimacy is the language of that choice. Every time you reach for each other, you are saying, I still choose you. I still want you. I still believe in us. And there is no greater gift you can give to your marriage than that. Because in the end, what every husband wishes his wife knew about intimacy is really quite simple. He does not want perfection. He does not want performance. He wants presence. He wants to be desired, admired, touched, accepted. He wants to know that in a world full of demands, he is still the one she chooses freely. And when he feels that, he will give back tenfold, because intimacy, true intimacy, is never one-sided. It is always reciprocal, always generative, always alive. So let this be the invitation to look at your partner not with the eyes of routine, but with the eyes of wonder, to reach not because you have to, but because you want to remember that intimacy is not something you lose. It is something you create again and again every single day. And perhaps tonight, as you sit beside each other, you might let your hand linger just a little longer, your gaze soften just a little more, your words carry just a little more warmth. These are the beginnings. And from these beginnings, everything else can grow.